You're listening to DruidCast episode 178. Hello my friends and welcome to DruidCast episode 178. I'm your host Dave the Bard, and DruidCast is brought to you on or around the 20th of the month by the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids. If you'd like to find out more about the Order and our courses, you can do that on our website at www.druidry.org. What a fabulous opening to the show. You just heard the latest single from Bog Bodies called Firelighters, and I absolutely love the vibe of that song. In fact, all of the music from Bog Bodies. And if you want to find out more about the artists we feature on the show, you can find links in the show notes. Now, it's pretty blowy here and has been all week, and thus my planned walking the talk with this month's guest was more of a sit down with tea in his living room interview. You can hear the whistle of the wind blowing outside, so it was definitely the right move to make and stay in for a cuppa. This month's interview is with Dan, another member of our Grove, a member of the Order, pagan and occultist. And although we are inside, we still take a virtual walk to some of the places we would have visited had the weather not been quite so imbolky. Imolky. Is that a word? Is that even a word? Well, it is now. So why not grab a cuppa with us and join us for this month's Talky Bit. The Talky Bit. So hello, Dan. We've known each other for a number of years.
Yeah, quite a few now.
I'm really happy that you agreed to have this interview on DruidCast. First of all, the first question is, okay, we were going to do a walk in the talk.
We were, yeah.
And outside, as you might be able to hear in the background, the wind is blowing down the chimney in this absolutely amazing living room that Dan has. And the wind is blowing. You'll probably be hearing a strange whistle at some point as it blows through the window.
Yeah, third floor flat. Yeah. Very windy day.
Yeah, we were going to go for a walk in the talk around Brighton.
Yes.
So maybe the first thing to do is to say, okay, where would you have taken me first if we were there?
Okay, so first of all, we would have gone to the fountain on the Old Stein.
Okay.
And there's a few sort of stories around it. One is that the stones of the fountain there is a theory, I don't know how plausible it is, that they were part of a stone circle at one point.
Oh.
Yeah, the Druid's Head pub, which is a couple of streets away, talks about how it was named the Druid's Head because a stone circle was found nearby. And so some of the theories are that those stones were moved and put under the fountain. Oh. There's other theories that it was part of the riverbed of the Wellsbourne, which is now... It was a river it was sort of an occasional winter river that would appear and go down the Old Stein, and that those stones formed part of the riverbed. There's a ley line as well, apparently, which runs up the spine of Brighton, which one of my friends had a colleague who was determined that it was the best place to go and decide on any decisions he had. So he'd go and walk up and down the Stein along the ley line, and the answers would come to him.
Would arrive.
Yeah, okay. And I've traced it a little bit on a map. I think a lot of it seems to be sort of churches, which Brighton is littered with, so you can probably draw lines between them in anywhere. Yeah, so there's a lot of belief around that and around the Old Stein, and it may be the Wellsbourne, which is now part of the sewer, is a contributor to that feeling of there being a line going down there. Okay, and so is there? Obviously, there's no photographic evidence or anything like that of any stone circle or any of those? No. This was a long time ago. So whether there was or there wasn't, or whether it's just a story that they decided for the Druid's Head, I think stone is quite scarce in Sussex.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? That's the thing. Yeah. And I've heard a rumour. Mm-hmm. I kind of like the rumour that part of the reason why Brighton is so weird is that part of Aleister Crowley's ashes were were poured into the underground river.
Oh wow! Okay.
It's still his spirit is influencing.
Sure.
Brighton.
Yeah. Or perhaps the weirdness inspired the ashes sprinkling as well.
Right, probably. Very probably. Okay,
But yes, another really nice memory that I have of that place in particular is that there was a ceremony there for the unveiling of the plaque of Doreen Valiente's flat.
Yes.
So yes, there was a massive Wiccan ceremony carried out on what's essentially a roundabout, which is quite
amazing.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah. And then we sort of processed up to where the plaque was being unveiled, and that was a really, really interesting thing, because I'd always imagined Doreen Valiente having a sort of little flint cottage somewhere, and a sort of nice little garden and stuff like that. But she lived in a council flat in Kemp Town.
Yes,
it's a really interesting idea to have somebody who you've made such strong associations with the countryside.
Yeah,
and seeing the flat where she lived in. It's quite a strange.
Yeah, you always imagine
thing.
like Doreen there, with her cauldron and spells and stuff like that. And
absolutely.
In this woodland and everything else, proper Hansel and Gretel. And there she is. But what is amazing is that blue plaque, Doreen Valiente lived here, dates Mother of Modern Witchcraft is on the council flat in Brighton.
It's incredible.
I was over in America at PSG at that point when that was happening, so I wasn't there for that, but I was there for the Gerald Gardner one.
Right.
I went to his house and things like that. So yeah. Okay, so the fountain and a stone circle, Doreen Valiente's blue plaque unveiling, and the Druid's Head pub.
Yes.
Have you been drinking in there?
Not as often recently, but I've been a few occasions. The last time I was there, they had a whole wall of green men. The people who were there were saying that they were being frequently stolen as well. People would sort of lift them off the wall and take them home with them because there were so many.
Yes, Crowley's influence. Right. Okay. So we're back in the car. We get in the car.
Okay. Yeah.
Where are we going? Where are we going next?
Okay. So the next stop is St Anne's Well and Gardens.
Oh, okay.
So that was it's named after St Anne's Well, which is a chalobate spring, which is in Hove. Nowadays, it's not much to see. There's a bit of a stream of sort of fairly brown muddy liquid coming out from under the bushes, and then a sort of brick wishing well. But originally, well, not originally, but when it was a pleasure gardens, there was actually a little grotto and a well pump, and people would go there and take the waters during the Victorian period. It's a sort of yellowy colour. It's not as sort of red as the Chalobate Spring in Glastonbury, but yes, it's definitely got a fair amount of iron in the water. Yeah. The water table has since changed quite a bit because as houses were being built, wells were being dug, and so the water table has shifted to the extent that it's not running as fully as it used to. Mm-hmm. But yes, it's a beautiful park, and it's really nice to have a stream of spring water, however small. The other interesting thing about the area is that there was a burial mound near Palmyra Square, which was excavated is probably the wrong word for the time of it was happening, where it was dug up,
torn apart.
Absolutely, yeah. And in it they found an oak, a coffin that they believed to have been hollowed out oak tree, and one of the grave goods was a cup about the size of a teacup with one handle that was made out of very, very red amber.
Wow.
And that was in Hove Museum, but they've moved it to Brighton Museum, and it's still on display. The last time I saw it, you'd press a button and there was a light inside it, so that you'd press the button and the light would turn on, and you'd see the whole thing sort of illuminated from within, which was a really, really beautiful way of displaying it.
It's hard to imagine a burial chamber in that area now.
Yeah, it's
it's so built up.
It is, yeah. It's I think one of the houses is now built on top of it. It's not in Palmyra Square itself. It was a little way away, but even at the time of there were times earlier on where people would congregate around it. I think at Easter, I'm not quite sure, and children would play a sort of specific. I think it was a kissing game on the mound after church on maybe Easter or some time of that.
Wow.
And then Hove got bigger and Brighton got bigger, and it got
the house got fed up with kids running around playing kissing games around the house.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it's kind of Chinese whispers or anything like that, but I've heard that it was really big.
Yes,
it was like New Grangey, or maybe not quite that, but sort of Nouth or something like that. Very, very big mound. It wasn't a little tumuli. Yeah,
I don't know the dimensions, but certainly large enough to sort of to make something of it, even late into sort of pre-Victorian times. It was something that you would congregate around rather than it just being a lump in the ground.
Yeah. Do you have any personal relationship with kind of St Anne's Well? Do you go there for anything particular?
I used to live quite close by, and so St Anne's Well was where I would sort of, in a similar way to the guy walking along the ley line, St Anne's Well would be where I'd sort of go and sort of sit when I needed to think about something. Also for things like Imbolc, then I'd take a little sort of tea light up there and leave it on the well overnight, and then pick up the remains in the morning.
Right.
So so it was very much the sort of, also being in quite an urban area, you need a bit of park space to sort of re get in touch with the trees and things like that.
Sure.
So that was very much my space to go and sort of ground and also to connect with the trees and with the surroundings. And for some of the Gwersi that I was doing on the course, you'd need a bit more of a wild place, so I'd go to Stanton Park and things like that. But for some of the lessons, it would be suitable to sort of just go out at night into the park and just find somewhere to sit quietly and meditate on certain things. So that was.
So whereabouts are you in your journey through the OBOD courses at the moment?
I'm in the Ovate grade still. It's been quite some time now. The Bardic grade I swept through, but I think my circumstances were quite different then. I was living out in the country, and it was very easy to have that sort of portion of time every day. Nowadays I've got a lot better. I've got myself into a nice routine. So so I'm getting through it. About 7 Gwersi left, I think. So,
Okay.
So not far, but for 10 years, I think it's been. Has it been that long? Maybe at least 8. Definitely that I've been doing the Ovate grade.
Well, we always say it's the journey that counts, not the
Absolutely.
arriving at the end.
Yeah, it's not a race, and and if I wanted it to be a, there's corners I could have cut, definitely, but that it feels much better to make sure that you've properly feel like you've had the experiences that you need to before going to the next one.
Okay. So you're 7 or so Gwersi away from the end of the
Yes.
grade.
Yeah.
What was your route into Druidry?
Okay, well, I grew up in Wales, and the Welsh Druids are very different from the ones that I associate with now. There's a very big culture of Druidry there, but it's about the preservation of the Welsh language. I do speak Welsh, but I'm nowhere near as fluent enough in order to write poetry, which is another really, really big part of the Druids there, and
This
the
is all
there.
connected to the national Eisteddfod.
Yes,
the choosing of the chief bard and all that kind
there's
of stuff.
the Gorsa, the bards, and so a lot of that I saw as, at the time I saw it as lip service, it seemed to be a lot of ceremony without much feeling to it. But now looking back at the videos, hearing the Druid's prayer said in Welsh as a call and recall, where they say the first bit and then everybody and sing it as well. They sing the first bit, everybody sings it back to them. They sing it the second bit, and it's beautiful. But growing up in Wales, I went to Sunday school and all of that. But my parents were very much atheists. They'd read The Golden Bough and the White Goddess and things like that. So I was it trickled in at quite an early age, and I was told about the Green Man, for example, about the idea of the Green Man being a sort of hangover from paganism that found its way into churches, and that fascinated me about the idea of there being this other layer of religion, and something that was a lot older than Christianity and a lot more tied to the land. But at the time, as a child, there wasn't much that I could do about it. There wasn't. You can believe things, but the actions that you take about them, I didn't know what to do. And then I found Wicca as a teenager in the late 90s, early 2000s. And Wicca had the structure that I needed. It had the Wheel of the Year. It had what to do when, in order to relate to these gods, and it was great. It was a really, really wonderful thing for me. But with it came a lot of sort of cosmology. There was a lot of. It's a difficult thing to say dogma, because everybody gets very, very upset about the idea of dogma. Catma.
Yeah, instead of dogma. Very important beliefs are true all the time. They're useful.
Sure. Yeah. But one of the things about dogma is it doesn't feel like dogma if it feels right for you.
Yes, true.
So there was the idea that there was that all gods were one, and all goddesses were one, and one goddess rather, and all gods were one god, and that god and that goddess were in a relationship. And a lot of Wicca was about that relationship between one god and one goddess. The Wheel of the Year, for example, was very much about their sort of birth, mating, reproduction, and then death of these two figures, which were the sort of the ultimate of deity. And that, at first, I was absolutely on board with that. I'd everything was either part of the god or part of the goddess, or had bits of both in them. I'd gendered everything right down to electrons.
Right.
Electrons and protons.
Yeah.
Were male and female, and my dad was like, but neutrons and quarks and photons. But everything would fit into this binary idea of complementary opposites, and so I believed that and patiently waited to become attracted to women, as I was supposed to be. So that didn't happen. And there was nothing, obviously, in which to say that was wrong. There was a very much emphasis on sort of balance of male and female, and balance being good and imbalance being bad. But eventually, it sort of, as I sort of became more and more into the realization that I am gay, it didn't seem to fit as much for me anymore. I trawled through a lot of the books, and most of them weren't, most of them were very open towards gay people, but straightness was celebrated, whereas gayness wasn't. So because of that, I liked the structure, but I didn't really get on with the idea of the stories around it. So through university, I carried on with that a little bit, and then eventually we moved to Brighton, and I started hanging out with the Andera de Gorset. And from there I saw an entirely different side of Druidry to what I'd seen before. It was a lot more, there was a lot less of the sort of pomp and ceremony. It was a lot more down to earth, but there was also a lot more feeling to it, as well as it being words. There was genuinely this sort of desire to really, really connect with all the things that I wanted to connect to.
Right.
But another of the benefits of Druidry was that it was a lot more open in terms of ways of seeing the divine. So you can be any religion and also be a druid. It's to me, it's like a technique almost that you use in order to practice your faith. And the really wonderful thing about Druidry and about the Gorset is that you can be standing next to somebody and believe two completely different things, but you're both doing the same actions. And that's a really, really, really useful, important thing for me.
And so you found a place that, did you just feel more at home there? Is that how, or were you welcomed more, or what was it that was different for you?
I didn't feel unwelcomed. I think I felt freer.
Okay.
I think to do my own thing, to put my own beliefs behind what we were doing collectively as well. Yeah, it felt a lot more like you can turn up, you can do this thing, we can celebrate this time of year, but you don't have to sign up to specific beliefs.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more open in that sense.
That's certainly one of the things that drew me to Druidry as well back in the day as well. I mean, I came from ceremonial magic,
sure,
which is very prescriptive. I was thinking the other day, how could I describe magic? And I thought it's like dance. Do you know what I mean? It's like ceremonial magic is like ballroom dancing. It's like there are just strict patterns and ways of dancing that are even judged, and voted on as being, the correct way of doing things. And I thought, okay, well, what's shamanism? Well, shamanism to me is probably heading off down to the rave and, and just losing your absolute mind to the music with no kind of, and just opening up to everything. And I thought, well, what is Druidry? What is witchcraft and Druidry? I thought, well, Morris dancing.
Yeah.
It's like there are recognised patterns to dance, but no one gets too upset if you don't do it correctly. You just have to avoid the big sticks hitting your head. And they often evolve around a pub and beer and folklore.
Sure.
And I thought, well, that's to me, it's a stupid analogy, but I thought that kind of works. And that's part of what I loved about it. I loved the folklore. I loved the connection with the natural world. I loved the ceremony. I still love ceremony.
Sure.
But what I also loved is that there was no "you shall believe this" and "this is the way things are," and there's a lot of openness of interpretation of the path, particularly in the Gwers and that kind of thing. That's fascinating. So you went from the Gorset and then you joined the Obod, right?
Yeah. I mean, it took a little while. I think it might have been a couple of years that I was going to the Gorset. Before I joined the course, and that was really just to get to know people there and sort of see what they were about and stuff like that. There was also a message board at the time. I don't know whether that's still
yes, it's still going. Yeah. Actually, to be honest, with the way Facebook is, the message board is growing again.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear.
Feels a bit more of a safer space to just express, and you can follow threads and all that kind of thing. So yes, it is starting to come back a little bit.
Yeah, that's good. I like the design of that. It's a lot. So on that there were lots of people talking about the course as well, and I had always wanted to do a course. I was thinking about the Servants of the Light course for a long while, but the thing I liked about, or certainly what I was hearing about the course, was that the expectations were a little bit less strict. I think so. Yeah. So my main worry was, do I have enough time? Will I fail at this? Really?
You're not the only one who has said that to me over the years. Is there?
And the answers back were, if it takes 4 years or 400 years, it doesn't really matter. It's how you fit it in with your life, and you do what you can when you can, which I really appreciated. And it sort of took the pressure off as well. I think there's also very much in OBOD, there's the idea that, if the bus isn't going in the direction you want it to be going, you can get off at any time, and so rather than
right there at the beginning,
rather than signing yourself up to something that you'd really have to go all in on what's essentially, a lot of it isn't revealed straight away. You can go as far as it makes sense to, and if it stops making sense to you, then no harm. You can move off, and if your guides
ordained so,
if your guides take you somewhere else, then
sometimes
that's
getting
fine.
on the wrong bus is an important part of the journey.
Sure,
and as well as getting on the right one. So yes, absolutely. And so you started the course. How did you find the Bardic grade and up till 7 to the end of the
good, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it, because it's constructed, for the most part, it's constructed so that you can follow it with any religion. So I follow it as a pagan, and I am a pagan, and so I will see things from a pagan point of view. But a lot of it is written to the point where you can see it from other sides, and so there isn't the things that I was worried about with sort of the Wiccan one sort of framework of ideas. There is some influence from Wicca, obviously, and also very, very much influenced by Jung, which has the Jungian psychology has a very big idea of masculinity and femininity, and trying to find the balance between the two. So there is some of that in there. For the most part, it doesn't really matter. Most of it, it doesn't matter what gender you are or what your sexuality is when you're relating to a tree. It has no bearing on that. The only times when Druidry tends to get has a little bit more of a sort of celebration of heterosexuality would probably be around Beltane. And that was the only point where I'd sort of thought, this doesn't really relate to how I see Beltane personally, or how I would celebrate it normally. The first year I was very determined to do everything as it was written. So I did it to remember my parents, and how I am born and how most people are born, but it didn't really reflect the ideas of sexuality and that I practice in my daily life. There is also a hesitance to use the word sex a little bit when people are talking about things like Beltane, and they use the word fertility instead. And for the most part, that's not why most people have sex. Most people don't have sex in order to have a baby.
No,
they have
absolutely.
sex to connect with each other and to be in a really, really as intimate as you can with somebody else. And that's what Beltane is for me. It's about that sort of connection, coming together, intimacy, in the same way as Samhain is about separation and loss. And that's, for me, is where the sort of the two poles are.
It's interesting because we've had this conversation.
We
developed, we nobody wants anyone feeling excluded at an open ritual, and we've been running the Andera de Gorseth for 22 years now. Wow, that's amazing.
Sure.
So we've done 21 Beltanes, and we did used to split off into male and female groups, and the men used to do the stag hunt and everything like that, and then it started to feed back to me that some people like yourself might not have been felt included in that, and so we got our thinking caps on how to change it, and we basically made it more about still the interaction of two forces, but we made it about Nuivre and Awen.
Sure.
And so the kind of like the quickener and the gestation, maybe, or something like that.
Yeah, or the sort of the idea and then the drive
the fruition, to make it happen. Yeah. And the thing is that, Beltane, when I go back 20 years, Beltane was far less about human sex and far more about what sustains us in a harvest sense.
Sure.
And over those 20 years, it became more and more, more and more about human sex and less about the bread on the table.
Sure.
Or the meat on the plate, or whatever,
Yeah.
And I remember having a conversation with an old business partner of mine. This shows how long ago that was, But he was a staunch atheist, and he said, it makes sense. The only thing that makes sense to him is to revere the thing that keeps you alive, and that's how I always viewed the Wheel of the Year, as revering and giving thanks for the thing that keeps me alive.
Yeah.
And so, and you're absolutely right. Most heterosexual relationships are actively avoiding fertility.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They really are absolutely avoiding it. Fertility is not part of that. So that again made it absolutely nothing about human sex to me.
Sure.
And more about the forces that come together, that create a seed, that create the corn in the field, that creates the bread that I eat, that keeps me alive.
Sure.
And I find it very hard to take that out of Beltane, because that is what drew me to paganism in the first place, if I'm very honest, is the fact that I felt so separate from those wheels and from those things, that this gave me a route in, and it gave me a metaphor, I think is the thing. I'm not seeing it as truth, but as a metaphor to reflect that kind of that thing.
Yeah.
So how do you experience the Wheel of the Year?
The Wheel of the Year is very much like a human life. So we can imagine birth and growing up during the springtime, and then coming to your own into the summer, and then declining, and then dying in the winter. That is pretty much the same for everyone. There are points where, I suppose, if you hold it too rigidly, then you can imagine that this has to happen here, this has to happen here, this has to happen here, and because of that, you can start to create a structure where there's the sort of ideal life pattern, and then there's the not ideal. So I see the Wheel of the Year as being a life cycle. I do also appreciate the sort of planting and the harvesting aspect of, you plant in the spring, you harvest in the autumn. Those things are the same regardless of sexuality or gender or anything like that. There's times in the life cycle where straight lives can be slightly different from gay lives, or where in fact now we're getting to points where the idea of the nuclear family and the one way of straight people to be is very, very different. People will get together, people will divorce, people will re-get together at different parts of their lives, people will decide to have children, people will decide not to have children. All of those lives are valid, and all of those lives are equal in their in the way that we should be sort of perceiving them. For me, Beltane is, on the one aspect, it's about adolescence in many senses. So it's when you're on the sort of cusp of adulthood, and that's when you're figuring yourself out. And so one of the personal ceremonies that I've done as a sort of solitary ceremony, that I sort of worked out. For me, Beltane is about coming into yourself and self expression, and also about desire and about your physical body. So I like to use the cauldron as a posy, as a symbol of three aspects of how that's expressed. And the way that I've divided it is, you have the base cauldron, which is for the genitals and also desire, and the chest cauldron for love, your relationships, and then the head cauldron for your sense of self and your expression, and how you relate to others because of it. And that's a really useful thing, because it can change. You can check in every now and again and say, how do I feel about this? How do I feel about these three aspects? So I start off with my the head cauldron, and I think about how I perceive myself and how I perceive my gender and how I display that to other people. And this can be very personal for me. So I see myself as male. I express that through my clothing, through my hair, and through the way that I talk to people. Then I bring my focus down to the chest cauldron, and I think about the relationships that I have, the relationship that I currently have with my boyfriend, and also the relationships in the past that have influenced me and have molded me into the person that I am. The good parts, the bad parts have all brought me to the place that I'm here at now with the person that I love. And then move down to the base, where I think about my physical body, how my physical body relates to perceptions of me, my sex, as it were, and also my desire, what I desire, who I desire, and recognizing that desire can also be a sacred thing.
It's really lovely. I guess, if you view the wheel, views the wheel of the year as a harvest kind of thing, as what you
sure, yeah,
there has to be a place where human experience comes into that. It can't be, and maybe that's why Beltane has been the thing that has been very much humanized out of all of the festivals. That's the one, and of course that leads to the complications that we've had, and also, but complications lead to learning, don't they? And that's why we're here talking right now. Yeah. So let's leave it there for a time being, and we'll head off on our walk and the talk thing.
Okay,
again.
Sure.
And you were going to take us to, I think, one other place.
Yes, to the Goldstone.
The Goldstone.
So the Goldstone it's a large piece of it's flint and sandstone conglomerate, great big. 20 tons, I think it is. Yeah, it's a great big stone in the Hove Park, and it was in the 19th century. People got the idea that it was a Druid altar, and because of that, they would visit it. And the farmer got very annoyed that people were stomping all over his crops, and so he buried it. Yeah, and it stayed buried for about 6 years until one of the members of the council, who was very much interested in Druidry and believed that it was a Druid altar, found the stone, dug it up, and moved it about 300 yards from its original place, and placed it in Hove Park, which then became. And it's there with some smaller stones around it, which were believed to be standing stones at one point. And there's a plaque there saying what it is and what it was believed to be. And in 1929, the ancient Druid order visited and planted an oak tree there as well. So there's even though the Goldstone itself may not necessarily have been a Druid altar, it's now a sanctified Druid space
And the oak
by
tree
the Ancient Order.
is the tree near the Goldstone?
Yes, yeah, it's been planted near the
I didn't know
Goldstone.
that. I knew they'd visited, but I didn't know
They had,
planted an
yeah.
oak.
They planted an oak tree. It was in celebration of a certain milestone in the life of that order.
Yeah.
And they had a banquet there, and it was June the 3rd, 1929.
29. Fantastic.
Yeah. So,
and it's still there, this big rock.
Absolutely.
You can see it from the road as you drive past.
Quite a busy road, unfortunately.
Yeah, busy road. And that farmer's land wasn't where Hove Park is.
It was. It was Goldstone Bottom, as it was called then, and then obviously as the land got built up on, and
that was a
some
farm.
Hard
to believe again. Isn't it?
Well, absolutely, So it was originally farmland, and then Hove Park got kept unbuilt on, and then the rest of it was houses and industrial estate.
And have you done any ceremony by the stone there? Have you done any work there?
In terms of work at places, it's often a little bit difficult. I sometimes feel a bit self-conscious when you're in the middle of a park next to a busy road. It's difficult to sort of properly tune in. What I tend to like to do is I like to visit a place and then get a good feel for it. Maybe take a few breaths with the land beneath me, the sea and the sky, feeling what it's like to be there in that place, and then I'll go home and then visualize myself there. And then that way you've got all the time in the world, no distractions. You don't have to worry about people walking their dogs thinking, what's that weirdo doing? And then in order to sort of reinforce that connection with that place, I then take an offering to there. So I've gone and sprinkled wine there, or rose petals, or what have you, to sort of, as a sort of two parts thing. So you do some of it as much as you can without drawing too much attention, and without drawing you out of being yourself and into seeing yourself through other people's eyes, which is always a problem when you're working on your own in public. So I do as much subtly as I can, go somewhere more private, and do the sort of full visualization of what it is now, what it might have looked like, all of those things, and then come back and then make offerings to it. Yeah.
The Goldstone in Hove Park was one of the places we considered starting the Gorseth. We had the Long Man, we had Chanctonbury Ring,
sure,
and the Goldstone, but you can't imagine the Endeavour to Gorseth meeting there every 6 weeks would have been a very different experience.
It's the trouble is, I think at the time in the sort of 1920s, there was a big gathering there of Druids and a big banquet and all the rest of it, but the road was a lot less traffic on it. It's a little bit. In terms of how it's placed, it's very much on the road,
really,
very much viewing pets at home, and other very large shops and car parks on the other side of it. So it's not in the most picturesque of settings.
It's not, absolutely. And I can't talk about the Goldstone. I went to Hayward's Heath School, and at Hayward's Heath School there was a lot. That was at the time when, of course, Brighton and Hove Albion were in the Premiership, or what was League Division 1 at the time, and Brighton and Hove Albion's ground was called the Goldstone Ground.
Sure.
It was the only football ground named after a monolith. I always loved that back in the day.
Right.
And it used to be in what is now Goldstone Retail Park, across the road where there's Pets at Home, there's a Nando's.
Right, okay.
That's where the Goldstone Ground used to be.
Yeah, I was wondering what was there before the Nando's.
That was it. It was it was Brighton and Hove Albion's ground, and I know some of the people listening won't be interested in this at all, but I love this story because to me it shows real grit. Because Brighton and Hove Albion were in the League Division 1, then over the years they just got worse and worse and worse, and they ended up at one point holding on by the skin of their teeth to the very bottom of League Division 4, dropping out to the conference. It was the last game of the season against Hereford, right? I remember it so much. Last game of the season against Hereford. The owner had run the club into the ground and had sold the ground for the development of the retail park.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So not only were they dropping out of the league, they were losing their ground. They were and they won. And Hereford went down and no longer exist. And Brighton, for years, had no ground.
Wow.
They played at Gillingham, they played at Withdean or whatever, but they had no ground at all. But they kept at it, they didn't lose out, right? And then their new owner got permission to build the Amex Stadium where it is now. They went up and they're back now, years later, in the Premier League. And I know it's football, but that story, if ever they were to make a film about a football team, it has to be Brighton Hove Albion. Because not only were they named, their ground was named after a pagan monolith, but they also showed that grit and determination to never, ever give up. And I love that about that little club.
Wow.
So that's where I love the Goldstone because of its history with Druidry, but I also love the Goldstone with its connection, with that story,
Yeah.
Totally off the pat. But
No, I'd heard of the Goldstone Stadium, but I didn't know whereabouts it was. But that makes sense. Yeah,
that is where it was. Yeah. So okay, we left the Beltane thing because I wanted to get that last walk in the talk place in, because if people listen to this, they come to Brighton, it gives them something really, really cool to visit, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely worth a look. I think to have so much, to have so many sort of little bits of history sort of embedded in a town is really, really interesting. And I think also sort of we don't, as Druids, all live in some little house surrounded by trees somewhere. Many of us do live in towns, and so to find points in a town or a city where you can say, right, this is a sacred centre of this place. Even though there's Nando's over the road, this is still there's still a connection here to the ancestors and to the land and to the pagans that were here before. And I think that's really important. And London has obviously got lots and lots of spaces that you can do that, and the Ancient Order have used quite a few of them for their ceremonies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the knock-on effect of the pandemic and not being able to drive to places to get out in the countryside is a lot of people have found those little places within their square mile. For instance, I've found Shoreham Harbour has been my go-to place for nearly 2 years now with my dog, and I've found such a lovely. It's only a strip of land right by the foreshore, but there's a bank there that's got so many wildflowers. I could spend a lifetime trying to learn which ones are there, and that's right down. That's a road away from my house. And I think, sometimes we can think that we have to get out to sacred sites. We have to go to Avebury, Stonehenge, even the Downs. But actually, nature is everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, and even like just a little park, just going around and seeing what's there and seeing how it changes in the seasons and things like that can be really valuable to sort of connect you to the earth and to your Druidry.
So before we headed off to Goldstone, we were talking about Beltane. And the Wheel of the Year and the course, and you've experienced the course, you've experienced most of the Ovate grade, you've experienced the Obod gatherings, you've been to those. Do you there may be people listening to this who are gay, they're members of the LGBTQA+ community, who might be interested in Druidry or Obod. Do you have any kind of thoughts of what you might tell them if they were listening to this podcast? I know there's such a vast. I mean, it's why it's got a rainbow, isn't it? As an image.
Well, speaking on behalf of every single person in the LGBT community,
would you be able?
I would happily say.
Well, I tell you what, I know. I don't ever want to put you where you think you've got to do that. But and I know I've spoken to people from the community who say that their sexuality has no input at all into their paganism.
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, it's in terms of a lot of what we do, it's not really in the sort of the majority, sort of 90% of Druid practice doesn't really have very much to do with that. I think there are also lots and lots of people who very, very validly say, well, as whatever I get up to in terms of my personal relationship, the way that babies are born and all of that is what we're celebrating at this time, and that's what we should be doing, and because that's where we all come from, and that's a sacred thing, and it is a sacred thing, and especially, I mean, I think certainly with regards to a lot of shame has been heaped onto straight people for sex as well. I think there's a lot of a need for in paganism to re-sanctify a lot of the things that had been taboo and thought of as unclean and things like that. So I think there's definitely a sense that things should be celebrated and should be made sacred. I like the idea of holding things lightly though, because it allows for other influences to get in as well. Sorry, I've gone on off on a tangent now. So
it was a great tangent.
in terms of the course, I think for the most part, you can make it relevant to you in most ways. I think there are bits where there is a bit of a hangover, where things are unnecessarily gendered, but for the most part, I'd say, because there isn't the theology that you have to sign up to as well, you can bring whatever else you like into it. The ceremonies that it suggests are suggestions. The only ceremony that I know of that's particularly orientated towards anything sort of from the straight point of view, I'd say, is Beltane, and in which case, if it feels right for you to do it, then do it. If it doesn't feel right to you, then do something else. Find something that you can either, if you're gay rather than straight, or then you can find something that you can that can celebrate that union, that coming together. Or if you're asexual, you can completely desexualize it. You can make it about flowers, or you can make it about an aspect of springtime. So it's very much you're given the ingredients, but if any of them you don't really like the taste of, you can leave them.
Add or take away.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The course has already been edited once entirely to go in and to address those things that are we all know that Druidry Wicca have inherited a lot of stuff from the Hermetic traditions, and Dion Fortune's we were talking about earlier, where some of her books are very much of a case of even a circle has to have male, female around the circle.
Yeah. I think there was a time when paganism in general was very sort of a lot more fluid in how lots of queer people were very much inspired by paganism when Christianity was the dominant religion, because especially in the classical literature they could read stories about people who loved a lot more freely than they did.
Yes.
And so many more options in terms of gods and ways of seeing the world. And in occultism as well, you had people like Aleister Crowley who were using their bisexuality as part of their magical process. But then you had a reaction to that as well, where Dion Fortune, for example, was trying to make occultism respectable. And one of the ways that you make things respectable is by distancing yourself from anything that frankly at the time was illegal. So Dion Fortune asserted that homosexuality, for example, was a highly contagious mental illness, which was the opinion at the time. But when you have that belief embedded into you, then you don't allow for accommodations of it. So reading about Dion Fortune's ideas on polarity recently has been quite interesting, because there are actually lots of forms of polarity that she talks about rather than just male and female. Her favourite is male and female, obviously, and also because of the sort of and a lot of it was ideally a sort of unrequited attraction between male and female would create the biggest charge for her. But there was also the polarity that you could have between teacher and student. If there was a sense of admiration between two people, then that could also create a charge. So she wasn't as fixed in her ideas about two people, the people sat opposite each other being male and female as was originally interpreted. I think Gardner then, when he created his version of witchcraft, really embedded his own tastes into that, and a lot of those tastes are being now worked out of that as well as him being very, very much a straight guy. There were other aspects to his ceremonies which now we would look back on and think, okay, that's fairly specific, let's say, in regards to his ways of raising energy. I think also because it was his own group and he liked women, and the idea of being in a group of naked people, you will see it in most places where naked men outnumber naked women in most nude beaches or anything like that. It's just a thing. So I think it made sense for him to control the membership of his club by saying, couples only sort of thing. Right. So but then when that gets translated into it being a religion for everyone, there are parts where those things just don't fit. There's parts where people cannot be tied up. Like there is, there are, people have aversions to the things in some of Wiccan ceremonies, which are perfectly understandable and which have been cut. And in the same way, there are some people who the polarity between men and women isn't how they function in everyday life. Yeah. And so we still have that literature, and we still have those points of view which then come into the rest of our paganism. Wicca is obviously the loudest voice in paganism, so we're bound to inherit some of those things.
But I'm really pleased with how the Gorseth Beltane change happened, because that, addressing those things, but without taking the teeth out of the ceremony, I guess you'd call it. And what that change enabled was that we no longer separated into circles of men and women, but we acknowledged energies of creation of any kind, be that a poem or an art or ends up on your table, and we then opened up possibilities too, because then the women took part in the stag chase. And the men took part in opening up to the gestation that was part of nature as well. And I really loved that result. Was a beautiful thing to come out of that discussion that in some areas is difficult for people,
absolutely.
But that was a really positive thing to come out of that. And that was help with what was with your help, I have to say. So thank you for that.
Well, I think there was also an interesting thing with the Beltane ceremony as it was. You'd sort of separate into circles of men and women, which some people are non-binary, and therefore that puts them in an odd position as to where do I go. So there was that issue. And then the men would have a conversation and a preparation to go on a stag hunt, which involved running over a very, very uneven field, down a great big hill, into some trees, into some nettles. It was it was, and the women would be in a separate circle, and they would decide amongst themselves who would be the May Queen from that. But I remember even sort of fairly early on, I remember one of our friends' daughters asking their dad, "Why can't I be in the stag run?"
I know.
And that's a very, very difficult question when you bring up a girl to say you can do whatever you want. You can do absolutely whatever you want, except at Beltane. Then you have to be a girl and do the girl thing. And it's an odd thing to. I think there is a temptation with a lot of ritual to sort of see gender norms and then project them into the past, into a sort of a lot of sort of evolutionary biology theories come from what are we doing now, and now let's imagine cave people doing it.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily how. No. We've no idea. Even modern hunter-gatherers are modern hunter-gatherers. They live in the 21st century just like we do. We've no idea how prehistoric structures, how prehistoric society was structured at all. We don't know what the division of labour was. Our assumptions about the division of labour come from much later ideas about who should be doing what. So it was really good to open that up to everyone, so that everybody could, if they were able to, they could do the stag run, and they would personify the idea of Nwavre, which is the life force, the drive, the what gets things done. But before that, everybody would be part of a meditation where we would go deep into the earth, deep into Anun, and we would go to that place where ideas are formed, and we would take our inspiration and our awen from that place, bring it into ourselves, and then represent the drive to get those things out into the world through the stag run, which I think works really well. And that idea could be, let's make a baby, or it could be, I'm going to write a poem, or anything in between. It's
really personal, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that was a really, really wonderful thing to come out of that, and I think these kind of conversations will continue, and more we'll be talking about this kind of stuff, and magic, paganism, druidry will develop.
Absolutely. And I think it's good in that it has the capacity to develop, because we've seen it change in the past as well. Druidry especially, we've seen when Druidry was monotheist, for example, where most Druids believed that the ancient Druids thought that there was only one God, and now we've moved through to a Druidry where it can be practiced by anyone, because we've had those influences from the past. We know that Druidry can be done differently by different people, and so you can be a Wiccan Druid. You can have incredibly, you can use Druidry as a tool to how you practice your Wiccan beliefs, or you can be a polytheist, panentheist, monotheist. You can see the god however you want to, and also you can do the same thing with different people having different beliefs all at the same time, which I think is
love
wonderful.
about when we do the Druid's prayer together.
Yeah, I was going to mention.
Grant, and then it's a complete mess as everybody calls out what it is. God and Goddess for some, God for others, Spirit for others, Great Spirit for others, whatever it is. Yeah. And then you come back and you join again your protection.
Yeah, because we all want the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Regardless of
who we're talking to.
Yeah. When I first heard that as well, I was like, nobody told us what to say. Nobody told us in advance which how we were supposed to be perceiving the divine.
Yeah.
But then of course no one did, because why would they?
Exactly.
Because that's not important.
That is it. Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you so much for this talk. This has been such a wonderful time to spend with you. I've known you for years, but I don't think we've ever sat down and chatted like this.
Yeah, it's an experience, isn't it?
Yeah,
to actually, because we're normally doing something.
Exactly.
And,
yeah. These are the things that are happening behind the scenes, kind of thing, while everything else is going on. Anyway, thank you so much, and
thank you.
Yeah.
I have come to rescue and hold you. I am home. I cast away the shadows, the wind blows. I am home. Bring along the gold you did not. I am home. Bring along the gold you did not. Come dance among the fern groves alone, grows not alone. Fast your hands in willow black slow, guidance home. Sit down.
I absolutely loved talking with Dan, and I hope you enjoyed it too. After the interview, you heard Send the Babby to Bed, a Changeling's Lullaby by Bladerack, from their new EP Changing Track, and what another fantastic song. Thank you to Bog Bodies and to Bladerack for sending your music into the show. But this music means we are approaching the end of the show, but before I go, let's have the results of last month's competition. The prize was Sue's book, The English Runes, Secrets of Magic, Spells and Divination, and the question I asked was, much of what we know about the English runes comes from one particular rune poem that Sue mentioned on our walk. What is the rune poem called? Well, the answer is the Old English rune poem, and the first name drawn from the hat and winner of that book is Karen Carruthers from the USA. Congratulations, Karen. That book will be with you as soon as the post allows. The prize this month is an absolutely beautiful handcrafted ceramic cauldron, a little ceramic cauldron, and it really is so lovely. It was sent in by Jennifer Lombard of Earth and Ether. So thank you so much for offering it as a prize, Jennifer. The question I'd like you to answer is, during the interview we talked about a standing stone that Brighton and Hove Albion's old stadium was named after. What is the name of that monolith that still stands in Hove Park? During the interview we talked about a standing stone that Brighton and Hove Albion's stadium was named after. What is the name of that monolith that still stands in Hove Park? Email your answer along with your full postal address to podcast@druidry.org, and one of you will win that fabulous ceramic cauldron. Well, my friends, that is a show. A little longer than normal, but I think you'll agree it's been worth it. I'll see you next month for DruidCast episode 179, but until then, I wish you all peace and blessed be. Goodbye.